Okay, and I think that we're live. All right, so hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today for today's Internationalization and Commercialization panel, hosted in collaboration with MedTech Actuator, who are one of our sponsors for this year's hack. So with us today, we have a very distinguished guest. I'll start off with Mr. Joshua, who is filling in for Dr. Bas, at the CEO of MedTech Actuator. Mr. Joshua is actually the General Manager for MedTech Actuator Singapore. And so unfortunately, Dr. Bas cannot join us today, but Joshua will be filling in for his position. Yeah. In addition to Joshua, today we have Mr. Martin Lim from Onward Health, and Mr. Martin is the CEO of Onward Health. And in addition to that, we have Mr. Gokun Singh, the CEO of Osteopore, who will also be joining us to share on the topic of internationalization. And lastly, with us today, we have Miss Amelia Walsh from Austrade, who's a Trade and Investment Commissioner for Singapore. Currently, she'll be joining us at a later point in time. Yeah, so please do hang on for that. Yeah, so I think perhaps I can kick off this discussion panel by perhaps raising a topic of what we're here to discuss, which is some of the troubles and steps along the way in when startups consider expanding beyond their country of origin. So Joshua, do you mind if I direct this question to you first? So what are some of the key challenges faced by startups in this regard, or what are some of the unmet pain points that founders don't really consider? Yeah.
Actually, that's a very good question. Something that I think Kun Sing will be able to add to as well, but I'll just give my 2 cents worth first. So I think that in internationalizing, a lot of startups really, the major thing that they can't get around is cultural differences, how things are done in one country vis-a-vis the other country. Western countries have a certain way of doing things. Asian countries also have a certain way of doing things, and things might not be the same, right? So how do you actually adapt to the local country's norms, and how do you actually find reliable partners is something which is very important. So I then would ask Kun Sing to share on his experience in going to Australia. Probably Kun Sing, you can start off, and Martin can add to that as well.
Okay. Well, thanks, Joshua. Thanks, Benson, for this opportunity to share our experience. So just as an introduction, Osteopore is in tissue engineering. We build bioresorbable scaffolds. The enabling technology to manufacture is 3D printing. And we have been a spin from NUS. And since commercialization in 2003, we have about up to 50,000 implants in patients already, and they're all doing well. And the markets that we are in right now include the Southeast Asia and part of Asia market like India, Korea, Taiwan, and also, of course, Australia, some European countries, and USA, having had our US FDA and CE mark approved. And so in going overseas, right, one of the, I guess for all startup, you will be looking for partners like distributors. And it's not easy to, because depends on what your product is. You may have one product, right, in a specific surgical field or medical field, clinical field, then you need to look for a distributor that have that experience selling that related type of products, because their relationship is very key to help open doors into those areas. So that is the part on looking for a distributor. But even before that, to prepare your distributor for selling the product, there will be a whole lot of marketing collaterals, training materials, clinical data, clinical publication, because you need to help your distributor convince their customer to use your product, right? So all these have to be well prepared before even going to select the distributor, because after you select them, you need to train them, and then you got to bring them into the market, or work with them in the market. You cannot be there with just your product and empty-handed, and just your product and that's it, right? Because you need to understand the whole journey of purchase, of them adoption and then buying your product, and how the hospital work, because depends on the product, right? Sometimes you can give it to the material purchase department, right? Because that could be like more like your high volume consumable. But if it's a surgical device, some of these purchases are made at the operating room level. So then, how do you communicate with the nurse and the surgeon that this is your product, um, and how they place the order with the right coding? So all these have to come into play before even stepping out, into the market and try to get a network built up.
Kun Seng, how would you advise people to be able to understand these differences?
Okay, so yes, especially for startup, right?
Mm,
Um, it's very difficult because a lot of this knowledge acquired by being on the ground,
mm,
managing teams on the ground,
mm,
and literally just going to hospital visits and you know s- really going through the process how it works. So a lot of people would try to get um, consultants, right, to help them, right? I think sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But so coming back to my point, right? Um, Even though you may be having a product that is supposed to be a medical product,
mm,
but you have to look into the subspecialty,
mm,
right? In fact, if you go to even just Singapore alone, the guys who are selling the syringes, the cotton balls will not definitely not sell a pacemaker,
mm,
because the way they interact with the hospital would most likely be the MMD, the medical, the purchase department. So it's very different way of selling the product. So it's very important to define how the product fit into the hospital, and
mm,
then find the channel whereby that that kind of category of product are sold in the hospital,
mm,
and then do that. The other one is to, of course, go into a conference that is related to what your product is. The audience will be the right people,
okay.
and then look for distributor. Um, then there are two types of conference. The one that I seem to see is that they will go to Medica,
Mm,
right? Or equivalent type. You get all sorts of people coming to you,
mm,
right? And you don't really know, whether they can sell or not. Then
yeah.
there's another type, which is more related to the specific surgical specialty. So
Mm,
you can go to let's say a cardiac surgeon conference, you can go to a neurosurgeon conference,
mm,
those are very specific. Then by going there, then you'll be very sure that the distributor that are there
yeah.
will be very specific to what your needs are too.
Yeah.
So again, yeah, the selection is very key, where your product sits in the whole supply chain.
Yeah. Thanks, Kun Seng. Martin, maybe you might want to share about your experience in Indonesia as well.
Yeah, so thank you, Joshua, and thank you, Benson, for having me on this panel. So our experience, I'll maybe just start with a brief introduction to Onward Health Research. It's a bit different than what Mr. Kunseng described. So number one, we are an electronic web-based digital platform. We operate in the area of clinical research. So we develop platforms to capture data during clinical trials, whether it's a phase 1, 2, or 3 trial, or even beyond, out in sort of a real world setting. And then the other big difference is we're much newer company than Osteoport. We're about 2 years old now. We're on the verge of launching our first couple of projects. And so, on the topic of internationalization, I guess I made it doubly difficult because I moved from the US to Singapore 2 years ago and had to sort of learn, sort of the way of doing business here, which is very different than the US. And then on top of that, being based in Singapore, as Joshua mentioned, our first country that we're launching in is in Indonesia. And so we have one project already established there, and then two that are about to be launched. And so for a digital health company like us, the challenges are a bit different. The biggest ones for us are legal, understanding the legalities of running a digital platform, and largely around data, right? So where can the data sit? The biggest one that we're addressing is data residency. So Indonesia privacy law requires that the data be stored physically in Indonesia. And so, there's certain vendors that we can work with that meet those requirements, and you would be surprised some of the bigger cloud vendors actually don't. So we had to make a pretty big shift off of one cloud platform to another to meet that requirement. The other one is what you can do with the data. So, in digital health, if any of you are looking at creating digital health solutions, you'll be collecting a lot of information, which is very powerful, right? You can do a lot of analysis with that information, but you also have to make sure that the participants that are providing that information are aware of what you're planning to do with it, that they consent to it, and that you're aware of the different nuances in the various countries that you're planning to operate in. And so that's where we're consulting with lawyers that have expertise in Indonesia. And then as we set our sights to other parts of ASEAN and hopefully beyond that, we'll be doing the same. So those are the two, biggest things that we see that are maybe different than what Osteopore has been doing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Thanks, Kun Seng. So you guys both respectively touched on external environmental factors, right? How do you actually adapt to external environmental factors? I'm also curious to know internally, are there any challenges? Are there any um, workflow issues that you might need to think about or overcome when thinking about branching to another country as well? Maybe Martin, since we are with you, do you want to take the question first?
Yeah, so internally, actually, our company is already fairly international. I mean, we're still a fairly small team, but we're spread across. My co-founder is in the U.S., and so he and I have known each other for a number of years, so I trust him, and we have a very good relationship, and we meet regularly online to make this work. We've been doing so for over a year now, and I think COVID has kind of helped with that. Whether you're in Singapore, whether your whole team is in Singapore, or whether you're across borders, a lot of teams are still meeting virtually, so it almost doesn't matter. The other part of our team is here in Singapore along with me, and then we work with establishing partners, and we've considered, as Mr. Kunseng mentioned, right, boots on the ground, somebody in the country that you're operating in. So we are looking at potentially hiring somebody in Indonesia that can help with business development and getting more partners. And one of the challenges for us is trying to close these deals via Zoom, sometimes with people you've never met. And so, yeah, that's what we're seeing, especially now with the pandemic.
It's difficult, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
Kun Seng, do you have any words of wisdom?
Um, I think internally, you have to decide when you are going overseas, what is the intent. So some of them are considering like going overseas to set up manufacturing.
Mm.
So that is a whole, more complex ball game. Um, Alternatively, some people are like in our case, right? We just go through to look for distributor. Now, then internally, you need people who understand this kind of international market development, what it entails, right? It's not just because I have a product, I go out there and people just come knocking on my door and buy it. So the person you hire is actually very key,
Mm.
and that sort of people with the experience, I think um, not many,
Mm.
right? Largely because Singapore is still quite small, and the kind of industry we attract are very specialized and sometimes very limited.
Mm.
So, and the thing is that if you're in medical, it's not easy to just bring in someone who is selling chocolate to come into the medical to they try to do this because there are some similarity um, in how you structure things, but then the network and some of this intricacy of the devices um, it's not easy for someone to pick up. And the thing is that if you're going to talk to surgeons, which at the start, right, when you're trying to build that network, this person must be able to talk at the kind of language that is expected if you're selling let's say an implant versus just cotton balls and a fantastic new syringe that is painless and things like that. You need to have a very high level of understanding, because they don't like to, you talk to them and half the time you are like trying to find answer for them. It's very tough, and that's where Martin's services is very important, because you have to show that your product is safe and efficacious. And that's where the clinical trials, the data will help to support that conversation. Um, so yeah, so internally you need that the person. Then of course, then you need to people who understand transaction, the supply chain, right? To send products overseas where they go to. And more importantly, also is your regulatory affairs. People to get the product registered in those countries that you're targeting. And if it's not registered, you cannot just sell it, right? So these are some of the components to consider, internally before going overseas.
Yeah. Thanks, Martin. Thanks.
Joshua, can I jump in with a question?
Sure.
So
Mhm.
understand that both for Martin and Kun Seng, your product is in like a lot of different countries and locations with very diverse medical backgrounds. Who are the key stakeholders in all of the different in the whole field and the whole chain of healthcare delivery? So I was really curious because definitely when you come up with an ideation and you like start off with a certain set patient population, and there are certain characteristics that you have in mind when you develop this initial set of characteristics for your startup that you're planning to tackle lah. So I was wondering, when expanding to other locations, are there ever like certain key factors that you want to look out for, or like will significantly pivot how you either design the product, deliver it, like those type of. I guess really what I'm asking is what are some of the variables to account for?
Mm. Um, well, it depends on the product, right? So sometimes, like for example, Osteopore, what we have was or is a platform. So it's a bioresorbable scaffold structure that can be used in neurosurgery, plastic reconstruction, um, oral maxillofacial, dental, orthopedic. So it's like a whole lot, right? So where do you start? Um, so that is one. I think it's not a good start to just bang on the platform, right? Unless your intent is to become a R&D company, OEM company. Yeah, you can do that. But if you want to go into product, then of course after you understand the platform technology, then you choose a product, something that will serve a certain market, right? And be very specific on what it does, and really go deep into understanding not just the product, but the surgical procedure, the service it provide, and then of course the clinical outcome, which has to come, right? If it's a clinical medical device, it cannot be just I have this and use it, right? Definitely the services that Martin Onward Health provide is very, very key in marketing the product itself. So um, when we go out there, what normally, of course, we start in the home on your home ground, right? Trying to work with your surgeon here, find a design for the product that's caters to their surgical procedure of implanting it. But then the thing is that um, surgeons goes to different countries for training as well, right? Or they are trained locally with their own um, surgical techniques and all that. And then also there are trends. So these trends sometimes are created by other medical companies. So for example, in our case, we have one product that is to fill up burr holes. These are holes created in the skull to drain fluid so that we prevent excessive pressure on the brain. So in some countries, they adopt a technique of using a instrument that is designed to create a hole of a specific size, like 14 millimeter, 11 millimeter, So that is one tooling system that they use. Then you go to another country, they said, no, I don't use this our tooling system. I use another type that creates only a 6 millimeter. So the product development doesn't stop just because you have a product. In fact, going international, you'll find that your product development needs grows with it to cater to the needs of the local surgeons and their training and the technique that is being practiced, whether it's in their hospital or maybe if it could be nationwide, which will be good, but usually it can be very specific to hospital. So that is where your product development will come in. And then because of that, right, um, you may have to consider what is the message, right? When you have a 14 hole versus a 6 hole, your product unique selling proposition may change, right? So that is when the marketing team will have to continue to look at it. So yes, so the product development does not end just because you have a product or even if you get it registered. In fact, many times the product development continues for a long time, long period.
Yeah, for us, I think we're seeing. I picked up on the word trends that Kun Seng is saying, and for us in digital health, one of the biggest trends is moving physical interactions in healthcare and in clinical research online. And so that's one of the big trends that we're working with. I think in terms of differences with different countries, the challenges that we deal with are regulatory differences, right? The regulatory requirements, in Indonesia versus Singapore, and what they will accept are different. So a lot of places, when you want to register your medical device or therapeutic in a new country, they require a lot of evidence be collected from that country with different requirements before you're submitting. So those are the challenges, I think, for companies like Osteopore as well as for us, if we're supporting those organizations and bringing a digital solution, that we need to understand those regulations equally well.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely one of the biggest ones that we're seeing.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that definitely regulatory will be one of the largest challenges for all med device companies. Yeah. Yeah. All right, Joshua, I think I'll head over back to you. I think you had a question before me, right?
Yeah, so actually I was very curious. So Martin and Kun Seng, I taking a step back, right? I wanted to understand, in your first international foray, how do you choose your first country to go to? Right. So both of you have very different products, and it may cater to different markets as well. But I just wanted to understand, what are your thought processes and some of the difficulties you encounter and how you overcome them when thinking about your first country that you go overseas with. Again, probably Martin, would you want to share your experience?
Yeah, sure. So the thought process for me was, it was a combination of my experience during my career. So I guess my career is a mix of healthcare technology, software, product development, product management, with, I guess I would call it, bookends in clinical research. So I started doing clinical research at an academic center, and then I, just before moving to Singapore, went back to clinical research, this time administering a research site supporting physicians that conduct clinical trials. So this idea came to combine software with clinical research, and it was at a time before COVID, but you could see some movement away from paper processes and moving the whole process online. How we chose Indonesia, actually, it started with a trip for me back to Singapore. So my roots are from here and in Indonesia, and I was actually born in Singapore. My father was a student at NUS Pharmacy School, actually. So and I had a trip back here, and we were exploring, the company that I was at, opportunities to bring clinical research and sort of organize it and bring technology into it in this part of the world. And we started developing relationships in Singapore and in other countries within Southeast Asia, particularly in Indonesia. And so over a series of discussions, we began to see there's more and more of a need, and we began to develop more and more relationships. And really, I think for us, those relationships drove a lot of our decisions to come and establish, in Singapore, and then choose to enter into the
Okay.
Indonesian market. So I'd say networking is a big part of it.
Okay. So I hear that tracing back to your roots and the markets are one of the considerations for you, Martin, right? So for Kun Sing, maybe you can share from the local perspective, right, to go overseas. What made you choose your first country, and some of the challenges and how you overcome them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I didn't join the company at inception, right, which was in 2003. I joined them in 2015.
Yep.
So I can explain or share the part where when the professor were running the company.
Yeah.
So um so when they start, right, they would do things like now, all these joint conferences and meetings, and because they are professors, many of them also get invited to speak at conferences.
Mm.
So when the technology is interesting, people will walk up to them and then they say, hey, I'd like to distribute for you,
Yeah.
right? Or the other hand is that um, through some relative, uh, they got together and another partner and decided to, okay, I want to set a company and distribute for you, right?
Mm.
Maybe no more in Singapore, but maybe the relative and the partner is like, say, in India, right? So
Mm.
then they go start in India. Um, I think many startup do things like this, right? And I think that's the worst thing to do, because it violates what I just mentioned much earlier on, right? The product is a specialty product. You cannot just get anybody to just go set up a company and just go and do for you and distribute for you. It's not going to work,
Mm.
right? And so since coming on board, we have to start revamping. And so happen is that um, sometimes I just felt that um, after the product has been developed in the university
Mm.
and it is meant to be um, commercialized,
Mm.
right? You need a totally different set of skills already, right? People who have been in the market, the real market, right? Not someone who were in the university and they try to create, because the language and expectation of someone who is from the university may not sync with the local distributor,
Mm.
right? They have expectation that they may not work.
Mm.
So I've just felt that um, if they can get some people with experience, right, that'll be better. So for me, especially Singapore is a very small market.
Mm.
I think if you start any medical products here, chances are you may not sell enough to survive,
Mhm.
right? But then because you're a small company,
Mm.
you can't be going all over the world and try to do this as well,
Yeah.
because you'll be running out of cash very fast.
Yeah.
So I think the closest market around um, would be Malaysia, um, Thailand.
Mm.
In fact, Vietnam is now a very, very sizable market.
Mm.
So that could be a good start and get your product in the market, because just coming into the market, like I mentioned again earlier on, there is still a lot of product development.
Mm.
You need to be able to help tweak the product to meet their local needs.
Mm.
And of course, that will help to build your product portfolio as well,
Mm.
right? Um, and so if it's in the same time zone, within an hour and a half to 2 hours flight time, I think it's still manageable. And the cost of traveling there, accommodation is not too expensive.
Yeah.
So you can do more. You can travel there more, and easily those market um, could actually help to support um, the initial team that you may have,
Mm.
right, to get there. And the good thing I've also learned is that many of these ASEAN countries, due to the harmonization, do accept our HSA approval,
Mm.
right? So that makes a lot of sense to
Mm.
start with.
Mm.
I do talk to people from overseas. Some of them are my supervisor in the multinationals,
Yeah.
and even that they tell us, why do you want to come so far away to the US, right? Start with somewhere near where you can manage,
Mm.
because that is very key. You
Mm.
need to be able to manage your market, um, and then learn more about your product
Mm.
before you start to build a strategy of wanting to go to, um, let's say, Europe, right?
Mm. Mm.
And I also have this, I guess this is my own perception. It's easy, at least even if you get someone with business development experience,
Mm.
who have experience in Southeast Asia,
Mm.
right? Um, it's quite at least quite possible that they can understand Europe.
Mm.
But if you give them China, give them um, US or
Yeah.
Japan,
Yeah.
it's a whole different structure because of the size of the population, the size of the country, the way they are organized is very different
Mm.
from countries like in Southeast Asia or Europe,
Mm.
because um, many of them are still used to distributor, right, in Southeast Asia, in Europe. But if you go to the US, um, not easy to get distributor sometimes.
Mm.
And if they are there, they may be much smaller than you think. And um, so without the right knowledge getting in there, it can be quite tough.
Yeah.
So that's why working around in Southeast Asia, now the population is about 700 billion
Yeah.
people, with a rising middle income, and the strengthening of the healthcare sector, you
Mm.
know, I think it will be a good start. So I would personally suggest starting in this region than going too far away.
So actually, on that note, Kun Sing, I'm also very curious.
Mm,
Because around the region,
mm,
we have different cultures, we have
mm,
different practices,
mm,
right? Would it make sense for a company to think about a Commonwealth country first, then after that the rest of the countries? Because generally, we Commonwealth countries have the same set of rules, same influence in thinking, rather than um, targeting a country with the biggest market. Kun Sing, Martin, I'm interested to hear
mm.
your thoughts.
I personally do not necessarily think that it has to be Commonwealth countries.
Okay.
I think the key is your experience in the countries, as well as the relationship with the customer base or with the distribution base.
Okay.
I think that would be more important,
Okay.
because um, you know what they are good at, right?
Mm.
And they can help you build up your, like, your clinical studies,
Mm.
help you speak on in conferences on your product.
Mm.
So these are the relationship that I think is key
Mm.
to get started.
Mm.
Then just because it's the same system
Mm.
and we go there,
Mm.
you know, um, especially if you don't know anybody there, you just go there, it may not work very well,
Yeah,
frankly.
I take your
And
point.
in
Yeah.
order to do that, then you got to spend a lot of time there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To really get to know the distributor, how good they do. I'll give you an example. Um, we went to Medica.
Um.
Then we got a lot of people, want to distribute our products.
Um.
So this country was in Italy.
Mm.
So we have like quite a few. So we spoke to all of them, and then we said, okay, we're coming to Italy,
Yeah.
right, for a week, 2 weeks, and then we want to meet with your customer.
Yeah.
So we arrange for all the distributor, travel with them, go see their customer,
Mm.
because this when you're on the ground, you can start to size up um, truly do they have a relationship? Because what you're depending on is their relationship now,
Yeah,
right, with the
yeah,
customer.
yeah,
And if they don't have that kind of relationship, like I can make a call to the customer and they'll show up, and have a meeting with you and all that, then you have to be, at least take that into consideration whether you want to select them or not. So these are things that sometimes you may have to physically see and feel
yeah,
in selecting. So, but then if you already have them, right? For example, because you could found a regional manager in Southeast Asia
yeah,
and he knows distributor in Malaysia,
yeah.
that makes life easier, to
Understand.
get things going.
True, true. Martin, how about you? So what brought you back is actually your heritage to Singapore and the region as well. Would you want to share about your experiences and what you think?
Yeah. So I think, a big reason was definitely the heritage. That's what got me to start looking at this region.
Mm,
But the other side of it was also we saw that there was quite a big need in this region. As Kun Seng mentioned, there's 700 million people within ASEAN alone, right? And that's such a large market. That's 2 times the size of the U.S. And when you look at the clinical research numbers for us, they were very low in the region.
mm,
And I think one of the things that we saw is in clinical research, that's dangerous because then you're not representing the population,
mm.
especially if you're planning to bring your product into these markets.
Yeah,
They're being tested on European data or on US data. Um, and with a medical device, it could be dangerous. With a therapeutic, it could be even more dangerous,
yeah,
right? Or it's just either ineffective or perhaps worse, deadly. So that's what brought us here. And the other thing, sort of to expand on the relationships in Indonesia, I would agree with what Kun Seng was saying. The people that we have developed relationships with in Indonesia were very capable to sort of handle the handoff where so as a technology company, we would fulfill a need that they had.
mm,
Much of the work is being done on paper, it's error prone, they can move it digitally.
yeah,
And then they were able to sort of pick up the rest. They understood the regulatory requirements in Indonesia. Um, our first project, for example, was a combination of a medical device and therapeutic, and it was actually a Boston-based Boston, Massachusetts-based company
yeah,
that ran a global trial and wanted to, ramp up recruitment. And they had their sights set on the region, especially because of the large population.
yeah,
So we brought them in together with a partner into Jakarta, and so it was nice to have a partner that we could trust, that knew the local regulations, had experience in relationships with the regulators, and made that successful.
yeah,
And so as we look to expand into other countries, we're developing those same type of relationships. We're looking for the people that understand it, that have done it before, and then can make those things happen. Because right now it is very different country by country.
yeah,
Although I think we're seeing there's a trend of regulatory harmonization right in the region, and
yeah,
so I think that will start to help as we enter into more countries, and also help us as a platform to hopefully not have to develop 11 different versions of what we're doing, and start to bring harmonization to our customers, medical device companies, therapeutics companies who want to enter in this region, and conduct research and then eventually market their products.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so,
I would like to add on to that.
mm,
With regards to the culture, right, which you guys mentioned a couple
mm,
of times, um, actually the culture will lead to how they structure their healthcare in
okay,
those countries, right? In Thailand, there's this 30 baht scheme, right?
mm,
You go to a hospital, all you need to do is pay 30 baht, you get a heart surgery, right? So they have schemes like this,
yeah,
right? Um, so these are structures that we need to know. And some country like Vietnam, they have a scheme for the civil servant.
mhm,
I think Thailand also have the same thing. A scheme for the civil servant, a scheme for the general public. So you need to get to know all this, um,
mm,
and what are they willing to pay for,
mhm,
whether it's through insurance base, or in Thailand it's actually just one off. Just pay. They already structure it nicely for that.
yeah,
So then these are important because then how to target, and which hospital to go
Yeah.
to help support those schemes to provide the therapy for their patients.
Yeah, definitely agree. Joshua, if you don't mind me
Go
interjecting
ahead.
one further question.
Yeah.
So, Martin and Kunze, I'm curious, if you don't mind me bringing you back to the early days of your startup journey and your innovation process. When you design these in the beginning stages of the innovation, and when you're crafting what essentially is your timeline and your roadmap, what would you say is like perhaps the most important thing to consider when you put down on your roadmap, like I plan to expand into X country, or I plan to expand into Y region? Would you say it's something like along the lines of market analysis, patient needs assessment, as Kunze was mentioning earlier, the assessment of the healthcare structure in general? What would you say is the primary thing to consider when you put that? For example, I want to expand into Malaysia on your product roadmap. Yeah.
Mm,
I think for us, so for me, it wasn't that long ago, and I think we're still in the process of doing that, right? And so as I just look back at the last 2 years, I think first of all, what I would say is when I first founded the company, and the model that we had was quite different than what it is today. We always had technology in mind, and just because of my background, I knew there was a place for technology in clinical research. But initially, the model was actually to partner with hospitals and create a network of hospitals that the sponsors could then, if they needed a particular therapeutic area to work with, they would just come to us, and we would immediately start up the clinical trial with 20 investigators. You would easily capture a large number of patients, and speed up the clinical trial process. And that's still in the back, the back of our minds, that there's value in doing that. But for us, COVID really shifted the priority to building our technology platform. All of the partnerships, so early on, we developed hospital partnerships, and we even identified a number of sponsors from the region, including India and China, that wanted to run their clinical trials through us. And that all came to a halt in early 2020, right? And so I think timing, fortunately for us, was that my co-founder and I had already started to discuss plans for our technology, and we spent the bulk of last year just delivering on that. So that's you. I guess the message there is just you can't. It's hard to really plan for these kinds of things. And I think last year was was kind of an outlier, right? They're not going to be like that. But as we look ahead, it kind of comes back to some of the things we talk about. For us, we look at where there are hotspots in healthcare that are advancing in their thinking. And we're seeing, for example, in Vietnam, we're seeing a lot of advancements in their delivery of healthcare, but also in the digitalization. And so for us, that's one market that we're interested in exploring further. And we started to talk with people and develop those relationships that can hopefully be sort of the counterparts to the ones we've developed in Indonesia to make that entry more successful.
Perfect. Yeah.
So in our case, I'm making an assumption that we have CE mark and some kind of regulatory approval already, right? Because otherwise, it's not easy to get into any country. So what I found is that if you have all that, right, and let's say I have someone whom I am comfortable with, so that will be a partner. So I think the key is to get a partner, right? And this partner must be willing to put in the time, because if, for example, I met up with the distributor in Vietnam, and I think they know what they are doing, and they have the network, right? So this part alone, you need to spend time, right? Then after you get this partner, right, you haven't sold a single thing yet, right? And this partner must be able to help you through the registration process. So I may have CE mark, but that doesn't mean I can just walk in and sell. There is a Vietnam FDA approval process.
Yeah.
So they will have to spend the time to work with you to get the approval, right? And then after you get the approval, right, then he can, then you, or we have to start to identify which doctor you want to start with, whereby their impact will be influential for other hospital to follow, right? So this is where, that's why to me the key is really important is to get the right partner. And I think spending time to identify that is crucial to be successful.
Yeah.
Definitely. So I think looking at the whole concept of partnerships and like building relations is probably the most important factor to consider.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Great to hear. Great to hear. Joshua, I'll hand back to you.
So actually, conscious of time, probably one thing that I'd like to maybe do some marketing for Meta Actuator is that we're actually an Australian-based company, and Kun Sing is a dear friend, and Martin is one of our startups as well. So Meta Actuator helps to accelerate companies from seed stage all the way to commercialization, and we do that through a variety of partners, right? So to add to Martin and Kun Sing's point, we have over 100 partners in both Singapore and in Australia that can do exactly like what they mentioned, right? Introduce you to appropriate key opinion leaders, clinical key opinion leaders in both Singapore and Australia, regulatory consultants, product manufacturers, distributors, IP lawyers, what have you, to help you to both land in the respective countries and to grow there as well. So that is what we have been seeing, and we think this is really successful. So yeah, Kun Sing, to the point of which I asked you on Commonwealth countries, the reason why Australia or Meta Australia branch to Singapore is that we have a common set of rules and we both speak English, right? So it's easier to communicate to the headquarters. So I was wondering whether was it the same for you and for Martin as well. So
For you mean for our Australia setup?
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and for your question, right? I've been involved with Australia since 1988.
Mhm.
So starting with the surgeons there, the setup of a startup, together with Australia. So it's been a while. I'm quite familiar with the way they do things.
Yeah.
More importantly is the culture. It's a very nice culture working in Australia. And that's where I think one of the reasons why we chose to have our company IPO in Australia. Many of them are very familiar with medical device,
Mhm.
and they understand. In fact, when we went to do the roadshow,
Mm.
I was very, very pleasantly surprised that instead of us telling them what our product can do, they were more excited than us that what our product can do. So that is because they are so up to date with technology,
Mm.
and so it makes it quite a breeze to get into the Australian market.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Kun Sing. Martin, if you have any last words of nuggets of wisdom to share, anything that
Yeah.
you bring up, yeah.
Well, I can elaborate also just, as a startup in the actuator program last year, I can talk a little bit about that and our decision to join was also, being in Singapore, we looked at Australia as a potential market to enter as well. And where we saw it was that Australia and Singapore had a lot of similarities, and they both had very robust clinical research infrastructure experts in place. And so through technology, one of the things that we wanted to do was form relationships with both countries and then bridge them to the rest of ASEAN so that, while Singapore and Australia have a lot of expertise, they also have small populations. So if we can tap into the larger populations, co-conduct trials, share some of that expertise, grow the expertise in other parts of ASEAN as well, while conducting more rapid clinical trials. That's one of the reasons why we chose to go into the actuator. And I think since participating, as Joshua mentioned, we've been connected into organizations here in Singapore. We received a grant with in a partnership with Singapore Biodesign. We've been introduced to a number of advisors. Actually, two of them are based in Australia, and one of them ended up being one of our investors in the company. So, I think we can certainly say we've gotten a lot out of being in the program, for sure. So.
Thanks for the word of affirmation, Martin. Yeah, Benson,
Sure.
I think we are running out of time, right?
Definitely conscious of time. I think that we can more or less prepare to close off the session. So just once again wanted to extend our thanks to Kun Seng, Martin, as well as Joshua for joining us for this session. Very enlightening to hear more about MedTech Actuator, as well as some of the success stories. And I hope all of our participants were able to take away some learning lessons on moving your moving your startup from Singapore, as well as expanding the reach, regional as well as global, and some of the lessons to take away moving into preliminaries as well as into finals. Yeah. So once again, just wanted to say, give a warm round of applause to all of our panelists, of course, and as well to say thanks to all of our participants for joining us for this session. Yeah. So without further ado, we'd like to close off the session and say bye to everyone. Yeah. So see everyone soon.